Good afternoon. I am Dean Usha Rodriguez, and I would like to welcome you to the University of Georgia School of Law and the 42nd Edith House Lecture. I would particularly like to welcome today's speaker, the Honorable Beverly Martin, as well as a few family members of Edith House. The Edith House Lecture Series brings outstanding women legal scholars and practitioners to our campus, and this year is an especially meaningful one. 100 years ago, in 1925, the first women to ever receive a law degree from UGA earned their diplomas. There were two women in the class of 1925, Edith Elizabeth House and Gussie Brooks. These women forged a path for so many of you in this room today, including our guest speaker, Judge Martin, and Edith's cousin, Judge Alice Benton, who I'm pleased to say are both alumni of our law school. Additionally, there are two current law students, Maggie Camfield and Sawyer Bradford, who benefit from scholarships named in memory of Edith House. Here at the University of Georgia School of Law, we are committed to redefining what it means to be a great national public law school by offering a hands-on, purpose-driven educational experience that matches excellence and access. This vision comes to life through three words: prepare, connect, and lead. We prepare our students both inside and outside the classroom through courses, externships, and practical training. We connect them through thought leaders, including our own faculty and distinguished guests, and we inspire our students to become leaders, both in the legal profession and in our own communities. We are fortunate to have an endowed lecture series that affords the opportunity for accomplished women professors, judges, lawyers, and legal professionals to come to our campus and share their experiences of being successful women in the law. We are also fortunate to have an active Georgia Association of Women Lawyers chapter at our law school, which is now supported by a separate endowed fund established late last year to assist with programming and activities for the group's members and for the greater law school community. I am pleased to now introduce you to one of the current leaders of GAL who helped to organize today's event, Maggie Galvin. Maggie is the association's vice president. She is a third-year student from Cleveland, Ohio. She earned her bachelor's degree from St. Mary's College. And in addition to her leadership role in GAL, Maggie is a Dean's Ambassador and serves on the Honor Court. She is a recipient of the 2025 Edward J. Henning Memorial ADR Award. She intends to practice labor and employment law and will work at Littler Mendelsohn in Atlanta after graduation. Thank you again for your attendance, and now I will turn things over to Maggie.
Thank you, Dean Rodriguez. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maggie Galvin, and I serve as the Vice President of UGA's chapter of the Georgia Association of Women Lawyers, or GAL. And on behalf of UGA and our GAL chapter, I would like to thank all of you for joining us at the 42nd Annual Edith House Lecture. The Edith House Lecture Series brings female legal scholars and practitioners to speak at Georgia Law every year in honor of Edith Elizabeth House. Miss House, a native of Winder, Georgia, was a member of our law school's first class to graduate women. She graduated in 1925 as co-valedictorian of her class, and then enjoyed a distinguished career in public service spanning over 30 years. We are honored to continue her legacy with this series. Today, we are privileged to be joined by Judge Beverly Martin. Judge Martin received her bachelor's from Stetson University and her JD from the University of Georgia School of Law. She began her legal career in private practice at the law firm of Martin, Snow, Grant, and Napier, LLP, in 1981. In 1984, her career path pivoted when she became an assistant attorney general in Atlanta. After 10 years in that position, Judge Martin moved to become an assistant U.S. attorney for the Middle District of Georgia before becoming the United States attorney for that district. Judge Martin then sat for nearly a decade as a U.S. District Judge for the Northern District of Georgia in Atlanta, And in 2010, Judge Martin was appointed as a member of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, where she served until 2021. After leaving the court, Judge Martin went to work for New York University Law School as the executive director for the Center on Civil Justice. Now she works as an arbitrator and mediator for JAMS, while also serving as a volunteer for Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, California, where she works to support the legal team. At this time, please join me in welcoming the Honorable Beverly B. Martin.
Kind of relieved. I kept thinking somebody was going to jump out and say, April Fools! It's such a privilege for me to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity and honor Edith Elizabeth House. Her cousin, Mary Ogletree, is here, so thank you for making it possible for all of us to be together today. I like to think in my mind about what Ms. House would think if she could peek in here today. I think she'd be thrilled with our new dean and all of you. So thank you for making this possible. And since the pandemic, I just am over the moon to be able to be together in person with interesting people, and today has been that for me. I think about Martin Luther King, who of course presided over many in-person church gatherings, and what he said was, it's not about the going to church, it's about what you do when you leave from church. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit today, and maybe we can leave here with an idea about how we can use the talents in this room to contribute to making the world align with our values. I am addressing my remarks to law students, but they're people at all stages of our lives and our careers who I think can offer leadership. And that's what I want as a result of this. Now, I've been lucky to live a long life, and I've seen different theories of leadership during my time on this earth. My impression is that today the popular appeal is that it's somebody else's job to lead. We turn our problems over to someone else, and it's their job to resolve them. And it's our job to just sit back and criticize or, compliment, maybe. But that hadn't always been the way that we approach leadership in this country. I recently read Doris Kearns Goodwin's latest book, which is called Unfinished Love Story, and it's about she and her husband, Richard Goodwin, who served as speechwriters for John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson. And there's a story about John Kennedy when he was senator from Massachusetts, and he had this kind of improbable presidential race against then Vice President Richard Nixon, who was indeed destined to be president, but not for that race. That race is famous because it was one of the first presidential debates that was televised. So this is about the night of that debate. The debate went pretty well from the Kennedy supporters' standpoint, but he was due in Ann Arbor the next day. The debate was filmed in Chicago. So he had to leave the debate and go to Ann Arbor to meet with students the next day. So he didn't arrive in Ann Arbor until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And much to his surprise, there was a large group of students who were waiting there for him to greet him. The women in the crowd, but not the men, were violating their curfew because the women, but not the men, had a 10 p.m. curfew. I don't think that would happen today. But he didn't have prepared remarks. His prepared remarks were for the next day. So I I like to think he spoke from the heart, and he had been kind of ruminating on this idea of leadership. And he said to them that night, my campaign is not about what I offer you, it's about what I'm going to ask of you. And this was something he was ruminating on. Of course, it evolved, I guess, into his statement, and his famous statement in his inaugural address, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. But he knew, and I think we all know, that we need the talents of all of the people of this country to make it reflect our values and to serve the people who live here. This idea of his that he continued to workshop resulted in the Peace Corps. One of the things that I love about being here is I'm reminded of how grateful I am to be a lawyer, and how grateful I am to the University of Georgia for the opportunities I've had, more than I deserve because of the education that I received here. I know it's popular to denigrate lawyers, but I, to this day, love lawyers, and I tend to gravitate to lawyers. And I think the reason for that is because generally people that come to law school have a pretty strong sense of what they think is right and what they think is wrong. And they come here because they want to perpetuate the things that they think, they want to make things right, would be a clearer way to say it. So when we think about how we leave from here to make the world a better place, I'd like to start with us reminding ourselves of why we came to law school. What were the values that brought us here? And that makes me think of my mom and dad. God bless them. One of the rules in their household was that we went to Sunday school and church every Sunday, which I did for the 18 years that I lived in their house. And I kind of have memories of the surly 13-year-old and 14-year-old and 15-year-old that I was, that they had to drag out of bed and go to church every Sunday morning. But they were right because it worked. So my sense of right and wrong developed in those trips to church, and still to this day, it's Matthew 25:35 that I think about when I think about the way we should conduct ourselves in the world, and that is, I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink, I was a stranger and you took me in, I was naked and you clothed me, and the one that I think about a lot these days is I was in prison and you visited me. And I think it's important that we remind ourselves of our moral code. I'm reading a book right now that reminded me, the military academies, the moral code is, I will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. So we're armed with values and a moral code as we go out into the world. But there are a few more things to think about. I expect that some of you are sitting there saying, well, nobody's ever going to choose me as a leader. And my response to that is not so fast. When I was nominated to be on the district court, it was part of what they ask you to do is like contact your friends and ask them to support you. And so one of my law school classmates, Bob Proctor, may he rest in peace, had a relationship with Senator Coverdale, who was one of the Georgia senators at the time. And so I called Bob and I said, Bob, would you be willing to put in a good word for me with Senator Coverdale? Well, there was a long pause, really long pause, and he finally went, sure, Beverly, I'll help you. I have to say, I thought maybe there would be a federal judge come out of our class, but I never thought it was going to be you. And I have to think he would be pleased that my appearance here today is on April Fool's Day as well. other thing I want to say to you is that I can't tell you that assuming a leadership role is going to be easy. One thing that I think I know is that there's something about human nature that makes human beings feel better about themselves when they can assign a lower position to the people that they encounter. I think I probably am guilty of this, but you should anticipate that this will happen to you. You'll be underestimated, and there's so many stories about that. And you know, the famous Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg not able to, you know, be hired. I mean, the law firms that they interviewed with wanted them to be support staff, and I can't even imagine what Edith House went through. I mean, she probably didn't even expect people not to underestimate her. On my court at the 11th Circuit, Judge Kravitz had a story that I heard her tell so many times about when she was, this was when she was on the 5th Circuit, when she, you know, the 5th Circuit only heard cases in New Orleans, and so she was going to oral argument on the morning of court, and she was standing in the taxi line, and these men, you know, perfectly suited men rush to the head of the taxi line, and they take her cab and mumble to her, "We've just got somewhere really important to be." It's really important. And it turned out they were advocates in one of the cases before that. So it didn't go too well for those guys, but and you know, I one of my kind of things that I whined about was I dreaded going to the courthouse in Miami. I was in Atlanta, and so you know, they didn't see me every day. So you know, I always had to kind of gird my loins to be ready to explain that no, I was not the court reporter. I was actually there as a judge to hear the case. And you know, it's like, do we even have court reporters in the Court of Appeals? I don't think so. But anyway, so you're going to be underestimated. You should just expect it, and you know, plan for how you're going to deal with it. And people are underestimated for a lot of reasons. I like to think about John Lewis. You know, he was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington. And so he arrived just like me with his speech prepared, and they took it away from him. They wouldn't let him get that speech. Wouldn't you love to have heard that speech? He gave a speech, but it wasn't the one that he wanted, the one that he wrote. And I mentioned that I'm reading this book on leadership written by Admiral McRaven, really interesting. And he was a Navy SEAL. Maybe he still is, I guess. I mean, he's retired, but you know, very competitive, and he had been in this class that started out of 160 future Navy SEALs, and the class was down to 30, and he gets summoned one day by the commanding officer, and he said, you know, I've asked, you know, who's my best man in this class, and or who's my best SEAL, and you know, he's getting puffed up, he's ready for praise, and the commanding officer said, well, good, because I want you to make the float for the 4th of July parade. He was a little disappointed with that. And of course, people get underestimated because of race. I mean, we see that all the time. I have more time to read now, so I read the most recent biography of John Lewis. It's called John Lewis, A Life by David Greenberg. And he tells this great story. The dean knows Miles Alexander, you know, from Atlanta. He practiced at Kilpatrick. Well, he had 2 children. Kent Alexander, who was U.S. Attorney around the same time I was, while I was in Macon. He was in Atlanta. And then Paige Alexander runs the Carter Center. So John Lewis had been friends with the Alexander family for many years, and Paige was getting married at a really fancy black tie event at the Swiss Hotel in Atlanta. And of course, Congressman Lewis was there in his tuxedo, and he saw Paige, standing in a receiving line for hours, and he just kind of slipped behind her and said, can I bring you a glass of wine? And she went, I would love a glass of wine. So here goes Congressman Lewis to the bar to bring a glass of wine to the bride, and more than one person started, sir, could you get a glass of wine for me as well? And apparently Paige, oh, I didn't know you knew Congressman Lewis. So it happens. I also think about Brian Stevenson, and some of the underestimation gets a little more serious when you talk about him and the cases that he works on. He tells a story, he goes all over the country, and at the time I think he was representing someone who, as a minor, was sentenced to life without parole, and he was trying to get some reconsideration of that sentence. But so he walked into this courthouse where he didn't know anybody. He's sitting in the empty courtroom at counsel table. And apparently the judge walked in with the prosecutor, like, not a good look. They're supposed to come in separately, but the judge came into the courtroom specifically to chastise Brian Stevenson. Like, you're not supposed to be in here without your lawyer. You get back out there. And I mean, he thought that Brian Stevenson was the criminal defendant, not the lawyer. And, Brian Stevenson is the gentlest of souls, and he just, oh, Your Honor, I'm sorry, we haven't been introduced. I am the lawyer. But it gets scarier than that, because he also has a story of visiting one of his, destitute clients in an Alabama prison, and the guard, who had complete control over the situation, took a dislike to him and decided he was going to subject Mr. Stevenson to a strip search. And so he took him in the men's bathroom and did the whole thing, bend over, cough, the whole thing. So it's pretty terrifying, and it makes me feel pretty petty about being upset about somebody mistaking me with a court reporter. Probably Edith House would have been delighted to have been mistaken for the court reporter. But I think that it's important for us to remember in these times, and this seems important to me anyway, to remember that we don't know everything about anybody just because we know how they look, where they live, what their job is, how they voted, how they dress, any of that. I live in a downtown neighborhood, and it's got an active street life. A lot of unhoused people live around there, and this is still when I was on the court. I was walking home from the courthouse, which is really close to where I live, and it was after dark, and so I was just coming home from work, and I was walking down the sidewalk. There was a gentleman younger than me, a man of color, walking towards me, and I kind of arrived at the place where my front door was. So just as I approached him, I stepped off the sidewalk and to go to my front door, and he started yelling at me, and he's like, "Lady, there is no reason you can't share the sidewalk with me. I'm college educated. I'm not going to hurt you." And so it's the whole thing that President Obama talked about hearing people lock their doors as he walked down the street at night. Well, he was wrong about me, but it's an understandable mistake. But I think, if both of us could have stopped for a minute and just introduced ourselves to each other and understood each other, the world would have been just a little bit better place. And the other thing that has happened to me down there, sometimes it's winter time and I've got my hoodie on, You know, I was walking all bundled up one night. I mean, I tried to be out when it was too late, but it was dark, and I just walked up on, you know, one of my unhoused neighbors, and I realized I scared the heck out of him. I mean, he was afraid of me, and you know, I didn't see him there until last night, so I was a little bit afraid of him, and so we did have this moment, and it's like, no, it's just, you know, it's just me, and you know, we both left a little bit uplifted by kind of the mutual understanding that we were able to come to when we could actually see each other and understand who each other was. So, you know, life is so much more interesting when you learn about who the people you encounter really are. And I think great things can happen when we recognize the humanity in others. Maggie mentioned I'm spending some time at Homeboy Industries, which is, you know, a prison reentry program, and started over 40 years ago in Los Angeles, and it was started by Jesuit priests. So there are a lot of priests and a few nuns that are involved in the work of Homeboy Industries. And Father Boyle tells the story of a nun who lives in downtown Los Angeles, where there's also a large unhoused population, and she generally would take food or money or something when she went out into her neighborhood. But one day she was walking, and there was a woman in distress who lived on the streets, and she was yelling and upset. I don't know about what. I mean, just, you know, life's hard out there, and you know, the nun said, well, I didn't have food to give her, and I didn't have any money to give her, and so, you know, I just kept walking, but it bothered me, you know, to leave her in distress like that. So the nun turned around and went back to talk to this person in distress, and she said, I just asked her for directions. She said, excuse me, but could you tell me where such and such is? And it was somewhere the nun knew where it was, but she just wanted to diffuse this woman's situation. And she said, you know, lo and behold, it did. You know, the stress left her, she calmed down, and she, you know, she's like, yeah, I have something to contribute to this situation, and proceeded to give directions to the nun. So I do think there's some magic there that we're not taking advantage of, and I'm hoping, I mean, just try it. When you see somebody that you're afraid of, think, well, maybe they're afraid of me too. And this is probably a little more relevant for this audience, for the future federal judges in this audience who nobody expects to be a federal judge. Although I expect it. But I found it true in the 11th Circuit as well. You know, I mean, I think the idea is, these people, you know, we already know what to expect from them on everything. You know, we were talking a little bit about this with the dean, but it's really not true. And I found that my best days on the court were when I could pick up the phone and say to one of my colleagues, look, okay, this is what I think about this case, and this is what you're saying about this case, and this is what I don't understand about what you're saying. Can you help me understand? And, you know, and then they would say the same thing to me. You know, I think you're wrong about this. Tell me why. What am I missing? And, you know, I came to love doing that. I mean, we didn't do that in my household growing up. But, you know, at the end of the call, if I could hang up and say to my colleague, thank you, this conversation, you know, has made me a better judge, or it's going to make the opinion better, and then to hear that in return, it's just not that hard, and it's so rewarding, and it makes us better. I can't remember how long I promised you more that I would talk, but I'm gonna end now. But I have to say, and I'm gonna lose my composure. The last time I was in this room was with my mother and father, and it was a wonderful day. It was the day we did that, hung that picture, and they were. We all knew, their time was short. They were pretty frail. I have always loved Laura Pulliam for the kindness she showed us that day. It was great. And I adored my parents, obviously. They were children of the Depression, and their goal in life was to provide for and educate their 4 children. And they did an amazing job of that. And so they're gone now. And we had time to kind of reminisce as they were leaving. And I have to say, they never talked about their material accomplishments. What they wanted to talk about and think about at the end was the kindnesses that they had been able to show to others, the help that they were able to give people in need, and the lives that they were able to touch in positive ways. So that's my hope for all of us, that we have those kind of memories about the way we lived our lives. And thank you again for having me. I'm so glad it wasn't an April Fool's joke. And I maybe there's some questions. Okay. I talked to several of you at lunch today, so I may have answered all the questions you had.
So why didn't Bob Proctor think that you
Yeah, well, he was right at the top of our class. I was not. I don't know. He didn't tell me, but maybe he thought it should be him. I don't know.
So what would you say to yourself when you were a 1L or a 2L in terms of, it sounds like you kind of thought that you might want to be a judge.
No, I didn't. I mean, we were talking about that today. It's one of the great adventures of being a lawyer and a graduate of this school, because you're going to know people all over the state, and you will interact with them and have positive experiences with them, and you'll make friends. And then when opportunities come along, they'll think of you. So no, I really didn't. I went to practice law with my father in Macon, and then I wasn't getting much trial experience there, so I went to the Attorney General's office and got got to try some cases. And
So what advice, I'm sorry,
oh, okay.
so
I interrupted you. Excuse me. It's being a judge. You do that. It's not very attractive.
So what advice would you give that 2L yourself?
I don't know. It worked out pretty well, right? Just what I said. I think it's good to get lawyer skills. Like every chance you get to take a deposition or do an argument or represent a client who's got even a consumer problem, do that, because I think that repetition. When you get some skills, you'll get more opportunities, I think. But nobody leaves law school with a lot of those skills, so you gotta get out there and make some mistakes and learn from those. And then I think remember your moral code. Conduct yourself in a way that people are going to admire what you do. Learn from your mistakes and help other people. I don't. Sorry. It's crazy stuff that happens though. So I went to Stetson University because that was where my cousin went. I didn't. And then at the time, the selection for U.S. Attorney was made when I was in that office. Max Cleveland. It was really Max Cleveland's choice because he was a senator at the time. Well, he had gone to Stetson. So, I mean, I don't think he would have grabbed my resume out of the stack but for we shared the same alma mater. It's crazy. But then, when you get those opportunities, just like Admiral McCraven, that damn float was the best float they ever had. I mean, what a prize, when you get those opportunities, do your very, very, very best. And, if it doesn't go perfectly, remember what to do differently next time. So, hi.
Yes, Judge. If you can speak to issues of public interest and concern that are occurring in our country about the attack on the federal judiciary, and the issue of judges' opinions being not only challenged, but that other actions such as impeachment and threats against the federal judiciary, and of course the gobs of money that are being thrown in Wisconsin in the Supreme Court race. If you can speak to the importance of the independence of the judiciary, whether they're a Republican appointee or Democrat or whatever, that is sort of a sacrosanct concept in our country?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it better than I could. And I was talking to the dean today. I mean, she's been at an investiture in the Georgia Supreme Court where those justices are talking about rule of law. So, I don't think this is going to go perfectly. I think there are going to be some, upsetting chapters along the way. But, I've spent a lot of time with judges over the last couple of decades. And, I think they understand their role and the importance of their independence. And, I think we have to hope for the best and support them. Not by giving out $1 million checks to people who vote, but, it's an interesting time. I think it was who said, Benjamin Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it. And so we'll see. And I feel like I have to apologize for this generation, the mess we left you, but, we like a challenge, don't we? And I think you're up to it. Yes.
I feel like you shared with us a lot of stories about being underestimated by others, but for me, like personally in this time, I feel like I underestimate myself, and I'd love to hear a story about when you underestimated yourself, but dealt with that and overcame that.
I've been thinking, because I've had a conversation earlier today about that. So, there are also times when people are gonna think you can do stuff that you don't think you can do. And so I was kind of a baby lawyer at the Attorney General's office, and they would just hand me a file and say, okay, you gotta go try this case. And I'm like, oh, why myself? I'm not sure I can do this. And the gift that they gave me was they basically said, we know you're going to make mistakes, but just as long as you learn from them. And so I kind of thrive in that environment. Like if I feel like I have to be perfect, I can't. I kind of freeze. So to the extent that you can be forgiving with yourself and understand that nobody starts out perfect. You're gonna make mistakes. But and I think I've already said this, but I also remember I never, I always worried about being able to deliver what was expected of me. I mean, still do, really. But I remember, so, you know, at one point, when I was at the Attorney General's office, and I was still kind of a baby lawyer, and the Attorney General had been sued, and I think the reason why I was involved was because maybe I was also sued. So he called me and said, I want you to represent me in this case. I'm like, no, I can't do that. Well, so I, you know, did it, and I, you know, I relied on all my skills from the University of Georgia, and, you know, trying to, you know, do what I knew to do to be careful and make a record. And so about, I don't know, maybe a month later, I picked up my phone and it's the Attorney General. Beverly, I just got a notice that our suit is in default. And I was like, okay, let me go vomit and then I'll call you right back. But, you know, we weren't in default. It was a mistake. And so I, like, you know, got myself together and I got the file, because we still had paper in those days. And I, as a matter of fact, I even had a stamped, filed copy of the answer. So I walked over there and handed it to him. So, I mean, I think it's a process, right? I mean, you know, someone said to me one time, you know, that any success you've ever had is based on your thought that you wouldn't be successful. You know, so, I mean, it makes you work harder and be careful. And I mean, I think, you know, that's may not be a bad thing. I mean, I hate for you to be making yourself miserable, because you are very capable and you'll be a great lawyer and you'll serve our community and our profession, all of you. But yeah, I think it is a process of development confidence. I mean, the first time you stand up in front of a jury, you know, if that's what you want to do, you know, there are going to be all sorts of little voices in your head about, what am I doing here? But, you know, really what they care about is hearing from you what they need to know to properly decide the case. And that's what judges are interested in, too. I mean, it's really not a performance. You know, one of my colleagues on the 11th Circuit she would write the opinion that she thought was, you know, going to be right for the case, and she would walk out there on the bench with the opinion, and she would just go down and ask questions like, well, if I said, well, you know, would that be right, or is there a better way to say that? And literally rewrite the opinion. I mean, that's the help that judges need and juries need, and you can give them that. So did that help at all? Okay. I hope you never have to go vomit when you're in law school. It's not in default. Yes. Well, I felt like it was time for me to allow somebody to come take my place. And I was really impressed with President Biden's efforts to diversify the bench. And, you know, the population of Georgia is right at a third African American, and there never had been any African American appointee to the 11th Circuit. So I kind of had in my mind, like, that would happen if I left. So that was important to me. And, you know, so then I just had to decide, do I want to stay and be a senior judge, or do I want to go do something else? And I gave it a lot of thought, and decided it was okay for me to go do something else. Yes?
You mentioned in your lecture that you spent some more time as a late reading. I was wondering if you had any recommendations, particularly for law students or film writers.
Oh, see, I'm not sure these are going to be like maybe your dean might not approve of this, but if you haven't read Brian Stevenson's book, it's called Just Mercy, I think it's amazing. And he actually talks about being a law student, you know, going, what are we doing this for? Like, I don't really know how this is going to work for me. And so that's a great book. I have to recommend Greg Boyle's Tattoos on the Heart, Father Boyle. It's not really, you know, it's kind of a book you can pick up and put down, because I've never asked him this, but I think he just keeps a journal, and so it's just full of stories that he has witnessed. I think that one's great. Do you listen to audiobooks at all? So this Doris Kearns Goodwin book, the audio, they have excerpts of the, you know, speeches that they wrote, delivered by President Kennedy and President Johnson. It's really a great book, and I think it's good to remember. You know, it just wasn't that long ago where everybody understood that, you know, it's my job to make this country work just as much as it is anybody else's. Particularly, it's going to reflect the values that we have. Are you going to be at the reception? I may think of some more, but I don't know how much time you have. Thank you all so much for coming. And,
Thank you so much, Judge Martin. As we close today, I'd also like to take this opportunity to give a special acknowledgement again to who this endowment fund is named for, the late Edith Elizabeth House and her wonderful family, who are always willing to show support to the lecture series. I'd also like to thank Dean Rodriguez, Laura Pulliam, and Jessica Kilby, and all the people who work behind the scenes so tirelessly to ensure that this lecture series is a success. And on behalf of Gall and our executive board, I would like to thank everyone who has shown so much support and generosity for the past, present, and future generations of UGA Law's female lawyers. And thank you all so much for coming today. This concludes our program, and we will be hosting a reception in the Davenport Rotunda just down the stairs.